Is that working? I think it's finally working. What is up, everybody? I am Taylor. It is September. Oh, crap. It's September 14th, 2022. This is the Cranky Comic Book Review Show where I'm super pleasant and I review comic books. And it's a mediocre, medium sized week for comics. Kind of a good week. Kind of predictable if you've ever watched my show before. So I don't know. Don't watch this because you already know what it's going to be like. If you know what came out this week, you can probably predict the order for the most part. No DC books this week. My LCS, they were late again. Lots of issues. Issues. That'd be a good name for a comic shop. Issues. Get it? Comic issue. Anyways, there wasn't any. I don't think there's any DC books I was going to really get anyways. This week. I'm going to keep saying anyways. All right, let's get into it. Whatever. First and worst, because we're doing worst to best. It's how we go. Midnight Suns #1. I like the cover. It's a variant cover. I don't know. It's got some cool uniforms that have absolutely nothing to do with the comic book. Like, literally nothing to do with this. I did not really realize when this came out that this was a tie-in to a video game. Apparently, it's tied to a video game, people. So, spoilers. I'm not going to give a whole lot of spoilers to what's going on in this book, but that's what this is. It's a setup for a video game. So, if you know that, and you read this, just temper your expectations and set them at a bar you can hurdle very low. It's a low bar to hurdle. It's not a very good book. It's not awful. It's got a lot of Strange Academy going on in this, but it feels like somebody else playing in the Strange Academy universe, which it is. It's not written by what's his nuts, Scotty Young. It's written by Ethan Sachs, and he just doesn't have the handle on the character's dialogue, and it just feels out of place. It's all right. It's all of it is just a setup for something that's going to probably get continued in a different medium. So it's a Marvel money grab. It's got a cool cover. It's to be continued. I am not reading any more of this because I do not give a rat's ass. I'm not going to buy the video game. And it's just a weird pairing of characters that they put together in a video game. You get Magic, you get Spider-Man, you get Wolverine, you get, what's her nuts, Zoe from Strange Academy. You get that one girl from Runaways, the magic user one, and Spirit Rider, who is it might be a first appearance. I don't think so. I doubt it. I'm not up on my various riders of the ghostly realm, so if it is a first appearance, you can let me know in the comments down below. But I don't think it is, and it's cool cover, mediocre book. All right, this one actually came out last week, but Comic Book Shop has been having issues. Did I mention that Issues would be kind of a good name for comic shop? Anyways, Twig #5. This is the end of this one, although apparently Twig will be back. I don't think I'll be reading it when it's back. I don't care, turns out. This reminds me a lot of Kanto, and not in a great way. I like Scotty Young normally. I like his writing a lot in Strange Academy and some of the other stuff he's done. The Me Love in the Dark. I've heard I Hate Fairyland's great. I've heard good things about Middle-earth. This, not for me. Kyle Strom's art is fantastic. Really, really helped by the colorist, Jean-Francois Belot. Yeah, coloring's great. The art is great. It's the story that I have an issue with. It's aimed at kids, but it's not well aimed at kids. And it doesn't have any real emotional resonance. And like any kind of conflict is almost immediately resolved. And it's been that way through 5 issues. There's not been any sense that any kind of dangers lies in for the main character, or that anything bad is actually really going to happen, or that there are any real actual consequences. Apparently it's a world-ending phenomena, and it does wrap up here. It just doesn't do it very well. The pacing seems off, and the ending is like, oh, that's it. That's the ending, and it feels a lot like the first volume of Kanto to me, in the same way. Like the ending of that one was like, oh, that's it, and that's how that's going to end. So it has an ending. It's not a satisfying ending, and it's not a great story. It's gorgeous, but your mileage may vary, and if you have young readers, they might like it a lot more, because it is bright and colorful and happy, but I don't think it just, nothing about this one really grabbed me very well. I think the first issue was probably the best, and it just kind of slid downhill after that. Not a whole lot new was introduced, not a whole lot, new characters introduced, but just no new real ideas, no new sense of conflict, and no new sense of anything. So, it is what it is. All right, next, we have, this is a weird-ass book. I love this cover. Honestly, I dig it. This is the 06 Protocol. This one's a tough one to talk about without getting super spoilery. It does jump around in time a bit, so there's like little fragments throughout here, and I don't mind it. The writing by Matt Herms is mostly solid. I like the art by Cardinal Lee. For the most part, tells a decent story with the art. It's fairly effectively done. This is not. I don't think it's. I think the cover artist is a different artist, but it's a. Let's see, how can I do this? It is a secret spy-ish kind of thing where things happen right away, and then there's consequences, and these consequences you're like, oh, okay. Yeah, I guess that's the real new hero of the book. And then at the end, you're like, oh, there's a twist. And the twist is where it lost me. This book just really kind of telegraphed its punches with the twist. You're like, oh, yep, all right. Even if I didn't see that one coming, I really should have. It's sort of like when you have a fist coming at your face that ends up hitting you in the face, you're like, yep, that's what probably was going to happen when the fist is running right at your face. So it's all right. Oh, actually, Lee Turner's. Lee Turner's on the writing. Cliff Richards. Sorry, there's like names all over this cover. I know, a little bit weird in that regard. It's all right. It's not great. It's got an interesting enough premise, but the twist didn't work. If that makes sense, because the premise and the twist are two different things. The big idea behind everything, yeah, that's fine. But then the way that idea is handled, and then the way it permeates and twists and turns and things and windy throughout this thing, yeah, it's not bad. Again, but it's just nothing special. All right, next we have, and this might be where the predictions go a little bit lower, because this book has been higher on my list before. It has dropped down a bit. This issue is not my favorite issue of this, although I do still like the art quite a bit. This is Above Snakes, number 3. Sean Lewis on the writing, Hayden Sherman on the art. Hayden Sherman's, turns out, is just a beast with the art. And there's another book in here drawn by Hayden Sherman. We'll get to it. And again, if you ever watch any of my reviews, these books tend to drop on the same week, so you're probably aware of what the other book is. If not, you'll get there. Or you can just fast forward. Please don't fast forward. It kills my ratings. I don't care. Doesn't matter. All right. This is a revenge story, kind of. Somebody murdered the main character, Dirt's wife, and Dirt's on revenge, and he's got a talkie bird named Speck. And this is the Speck issue. It's the talkie bird issue. It's got some banter and some dialogue that are fun, and you learn a little bit more of why Speck is around and what Speck is. And you get a kind of a fun little side quest, I guess. But that's the problem with this. It's a limited series, I believe. Maybe it's ongoing. If it's ongoing, I have less of an issue with this. But a side quest in a limited series, okay, just tell the main story or figure out a way to advance the main plot further. And the main plot of the revenge plot really has not progressed at all from issue 1. And that's sort of where my issue is with the issue. That'd be a good name for a comic shop. I promise I'll stop doing that. But yeah, that's my main problem with this issue, is that it's just doesn't do anything to advance the book. It's still a gorgeous book. It's still kind of a fun read. It's just when you're talking about the overarching plot and the narrative of the story, that's where it falls apart and lacking for me. Your mileage, again, may vary on this one. It's a fun enough thing. If you've been reading Above Snakes, let me know down below. I don't think it's very heavily read, which is kind of too bad, in that I think Hayden Sherman's art really does deserve some respect in this day and age. And Sean Lewis's writing is fine. But yeah. Fine plus on this one. Not bad. All right, next. We have Daredevil number 3. It's a fill-in issue. You can tell it's a fill-in issue because it's got a fill-in artist, De La Torre. Fill-in artist is fine. The coloring by Wilson is great. Matt Murdock's conflicted, turns out. Was trying to save the world, turns out. And things get his way, turns out. The plot in this one's not anything revelatory. It's still a solid Zdarsky issue. It's still a solid Daredevil story. There is a churning undercurrent of what might be going on here, and there's not enough to let the reader in on it yet. There's a background character that has the potential to be interesting that featured more in the last issue. Still kind of fingers present in this. You get the puppet pulling the strings on the cover. Get at the cover. But it's a fill-in. It just screams fill-in. Even though it's apparently part 3 of a story, it doesn't read like that. It reads okay. We needed to stretch this shit out and give Chichetto some time to catch up before we get on with the main plot. So I hope next issue they get on with the main plot. if you're a Daredevil fan, this probably won't disappoint you a whole lot. It's still decent. I mean, Zdarsky does write a good Daredevil. It's just that nothing much really happens in here worth talking about. There's some villains, kind of. There's some not really even action in this one. I don't know, it's all right. All right, next. We have the horror book extraordinaire with the longest title. The Boneyard Mythos, 10,000 Black Feathers, issue number 1. Look, there's a Boneyard Mythos, see? This is Jeff Lemire. Oh, man, that mic is really killing me with the shadows. One of these days I'll figure out my lighting. Probably not, but maybe. Jeff Lemire, Andre Sorrentino, colored by Dave Stewart. It's a creepy horror book set in the Born Orchard Mythos world. Or Born Orchard world? Is that the mythos? Is the mythos the... Doesn't matter. Jeff Lemire, they started this on the subs stacks, and they have the different formats for these stories. There's I think a one-shot, and then there was also a graphic novel, and now there's a miniseries. And they're all just set in this world. These two have collaborated before, most notably on Gideon's Falls, which I've not read all of, but I've heard is fantastic. The first arc I read, and that was great. I just haven't finished it yet. I'll get there. Stop bugging me. Don't bug me, people. I got a lot going on. Yeah, Sorrentino's art is gorgeous and creepy and weird. There's a flashback story going on here. It's playing with the narrative of fiction and writing and blood oaths and the nature of creation. And that it feels a little tropey, a little bit Stephen King-y. Like, I think at some point every writer writes about writing or writes writing into their horror thing. It just seems like, they have a boner for it. That's not my favorite thing to read because I get it. You're writing about writing. It's like an artist drawing about drawing. Just draw something else. It doesn't matter. But it's a good one. It's a quick read. And a lot of Lemire stuff has been lately, and it's a pretty, you could, skim through this and, okay, that's about it. Fairly light on the dialogue. Fairly light on, actually, what happened in here. This one, I kind of wish this was another graphic novel, in that, I think it probably will read better when it's completed. And I don't know, it's just the weird shifting of how these stories are told, and I get it. There are different story beats you hit when you have a monthly and a mini versus a graphic novel. Graphic novel, you just tell one story, you don't have to break it up. And I think they're trying to have these cliffhangery beats, and there's a cliffhangery ending to this issue. Where you're like, oh, okay, that's weird. But then if that's that, then what's that? And so there's questions that get asked in here. Not a lot get answered yet. It is the first issue. If you dig Lemire and Sorrentino and you like the kind of horror, mystery, creepiness, you'll probably like this. I hope they collect it down the line. I don't know if they will. It's hard to tell with what's going on in their wacky little heads. All right, next. We have the last issue of this book, and it mostly sticks the landing, although it's a little bit odd. And that is A Righteous Thirst for Vengeance, what is this one? Number 11. This is Rick Remender with art by Andre Lima Arahu. Andre Lima Arahu's art has been the strong point of the series, although I do think this might be the weakest art-wise of the entire series. There's a time jump that happens at the beginning of this, and if you've read it up until this point, that's not a surprise to you. I'm not going to spoil anything else, but yeah, there's a time jump, and then this wraps up the series. It feels a little abrupt, but I get what Remender was going for. I get the why of it all, and I get the fact that the first 10 issues really were a setup to this issue, and it does end it. It's just kind of oh, well, all right, that's ending. I guess we're done now. It also is the most dialogue-heavy of any of the issues. I mean, there's probably enough dialogue in this book that to cover the previous 10 issues put together. It's still not the most dialogue-heavy book out there, and it's still not the most dense. And it's honestly not a very dense story. It's a pretty brisk story all the way through 11 issues. If you want something that's got gorgeous artwork and wraps up in a little bit too suddenly for my liking, pick up a collected volume of this, or if you've been reading this, let me know what's going on and what your thoughts are down below. But I liked it. I didn't love it. I thought it was a solid ending. I think there's some political statements in here that are apt, and I think it's not necessarily party-oriented. It's more like statements against power. And I like that. It's just, it just feels like it's missing a little bit of something. Just a little. Just a little nugget. But it's still a solid one. And next, we have What happens if you could take over people's minds? And this is the talkie issue. It's been a talkie book. Who am I kidding? From the get-go. Zach Kaplan and John Pearson. Zach Kaplan writes a lot of speculative fiction. He's got like 4 or 5 like miniseries going on right now. They're all kind of set in like near sci-fi or full-on sci-fi or whatever sci-fi. And then John Pearson's art is pretty great, although I do think this is probably the weakest issue for the art. It feels a little more sketchy and a little less finished than some of the others. But yeah, these Stanford or whatever the hell university, one of these, one of them their fancy universities where their fancy kids learn to speak them their fancy words. They somehow stumble upon mind control and they create an app. And this is the sort of what if that happened and how would real-ish people treat it? And it's an interesting enough thought experiment. Some of the Pearson plays around with the panels in here, and sometimes that works and sometimes it's a little confusing. And that's where it's probably a little bit low on my list. I do think it's an interesting book. I think it presents a lot of interesting ideas, and I don't mind it being dialogue heavy. But when you're not 100% sure whether or not you should be reading it vertically or horizontally, it gets a little annoying. And you can, honestly, probably read most of those pages both ways. There are pages that I think are gorgeous, and there are pages where I think Pearson's art shines. It's just not always. Yeah, and I don't mind the playing around with the panels when it's for the purpose of the story. Like, there's pages in here where it works, but this page, for instance, like, the way this is set up and the way these panels line up, and with the weirdness of the gutters in here, it looks like you should be reading it across and then across. That's not the case, and I messed that up. And I was like, well, okay, that makes more sense when you figure it out. And then there's this stuff where, you just have to read it around in a circle, which it does serve the story in that page. A little gimmicky. But if you want something that's a fairly interesting thought experiment about what if, mind control was real and maybe we're all being controlled, or if you just think, possibly our phones are controlling us. Gee, that's a deep thought that's never been thought of before. You could do worse than mindset. It's decent. All right. 2 books to go, people. 2 to go. I won't do that again ever either because that's awful. Now, Hayden Sherman, remember? Yeah, Hayden Sherman. Scott Snyder, Hayden Sherman, Rhonda Pattinson, Dark Spaces, Wildfire #3. This has been a great book so far. It's Scott Snyder knows how to write a comic, and he's in top form here. It's not crazily supernatural, which is he tends to love, but it is an effective story. There's these firefighters, mostly in a work release program, that decide to rob a rich house. That's the basic setup of it, and then shit goes horribly wrong because you wouldn't have a book unless shit going horribly wrong. It's the way the stuff goes wrong that's pretty interesting, and then the way that these characters are treated that also works really well. Sherman's art is fantastic, and I think he's doing all the heavy lifting on this, including the colors. And I think he shines when he's colored. They. I'm not sure the pronouns. Sorry. Hayden's. They do a great job when they're coloring their own work. I like the art better on this than I did in Above Snakes, although I liked Above Snakes. I just think the art's pretty fantastic throughout this issue, and it's pretty gorgeous. And without spoiling, even on these sort of pages where not a whole lot happens, you get the symmetry across the bigger characters. You get the storytelling that you're not really ever lost as far as how it's going, and then you get this kind of weird, trippy, flashbacky stuff that also really works. This is a fun story. I don't know how many issues it is, but the action is maybe it started with a slow burn. Oh, get it? Burn because it's about wildfires. Look at that. I'm a goddamn poet. But it's been blazing quickly ever since. Oh, God. Just put me out of my misery. And yeah, the reaction's ramped up, the pace is ramped up, and the level of tension is ramped up. I've liked this book a lot, and I think it is just getting better as each issue goes along. I'm really enjoying this book. And next, speaking of a book that I'm really enjoying that you probably could have predicted would have been at the top of the list if you've ever watched any of my vids or whatever, do a Powerbomb #4. And I know this is probably boring to folks, and you want me to have other books at the top or whatever, but this has been one of the consistently best books that I've read in a long time. Daniel Warren Johnson on the writing and art, Mike Spicer on the colors. It's a trippy-ass book about pro wrestling in an alternate dimension where the stakes are real. And if you just take it at that surface level, it sounds dumb as hell, and it doesn't sound like a great book. But what Daniel Warren Johnson has managed to do is really inject it with emotional resonance and power and impact, and also at the same time draw a fantastically glorious book that's kind of got some trippy fight scenes and action sequences, and it really, really works. I'm loving it. It had a bit of a lull last issue, which I think you needed. There's another surprise in this issue, and it's an effective story. That's going to do it for me. I am getting a phone call, so I'm going to wrap this up quickly. Don't be a dick, even if someone's calling you. I'll see you.